Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Jim Atkinson from Antimony Resources, which has the highest grade antimony deposit in North America. How are you this morning, Jim?
I'm very good. Just happy to be here talking.
This morning on Investor Talk, we were discussing how you just started on your drilling program at Bald Hill. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, we started our phase 2 drilling program. It'll probably started today or yesterday or today. Yeah, so our plan is twofold. First of all, to expand the footprint of the deposit. We did a little bit of that in our phase 1 drilling. We expanded the deposit about 1,000 meters to the southeast. The deposit, by the way, strikes northwest, southeast. So when I speak of north and south, think of northwest and southeast. So we expanded it to the south about 100 meters. We also expanded it to depth by about 50 meters, down to 400 meters where we've intersected mineralization. So our plan is to do some more of that type exploration, expanding, but also our plan will be to fill in gaps in the data that we have. What we want to be able to establish is a sufficiently continuous zone of mineralization that will be based on the drilling. Any places where we have, let's call them gaps in the data, we will be putting drill holes to try to close those gaps. And our ultimate goal will be to get the drill hole density and the mineralization continuity to a state where we can present this to someone who will calculate a maiden resource for us. So that's our twofold sort of drilling plan. We also have, as I mentioned, expanded the ground coverage of our property. So we'll be doing some groundwork, probably in the form of soil sampling or prospecting, geological mapping, to try to see whether we have potential anywhere else on our property. We have a place on our property where we know some boulders of antimony-bearing stibnite have been discovered, and we'll be doing some work in that area. And we will be looking in an area to the south of our existing property where we think the mineralization trend might go. So it might continue to the south, and we were worried that it would continue off of our property. So we acquired some ground to the south. So we'll be doing some of that work as well. But our main focus will be on the drilling of, as I said, approximately 6,000 meters. We'll be moving a second drill in probably in October. So we hope to get this drilling completed before Christmas. And, we can start putting out assay results in the first quarter.
And of course, for those of you out there following antimony, antimony makes the Critical Minerals Institute watch list. And you have an exceptional background with antimony, which makes you an amazing CEO for an antimony company. Can you give our audience a little bit more information about your background?
Sure. I worked for some years at the only antimony producer that was in North America at the time, Lake George Antimony, which is also in New Brunswick, and only about 100 kilometers away from where we're working right now. And I worked there as chief geologist. I was also chief engineer. I did the surveying. It was a small operation, so we did a lot of things. So I got a real good experience in how to mine it, how to find it. We did a lot of exploration, expanded our resources. But the other thing we did was two things. We looked at some of the known antimony occurrences in the Maritimes at that time, in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, Newfoundland. But also we looked and we studied antimony deposits and resources around the world. Fundamentally, these kinds of deposits had been studied by academics. So we studied the papers, and we learned a lot about how the deposits occurred geologically. And we used that as well in our exploration, trying to understand, okay, if these deposits are formed in this way, how does that mean for where we should go looking for it? So that's kind of the experience. So along with the mining experience, being the underground geologist, the exploration geologist, and sort of the academic experience that I learned, I learned a lot about antimony.
And of course, you were explaining to an investor earlier on Investor Talk about the actual demand for antimony in the United States. Can you give our audience a little bit more of an understanding about why antimony is such a critical mineral?
Well, antimony is what I call the most critical metal that nobody knows about. It has a lot of uses. A lot of the important uses right now with the expanding military aspects of the world are the fact that antimony is used in military applications. It's used in artillery bullets and in shells. It's also used, even almost more importantly, I think, as a flame retardant. So every tent in the United States and Canadian, for that matter, military is sprayed with antimony trioxide, which is what is formed when they do smelting of antimony. It's sprayed with that as a flame retardant. Also, some states in the United States are starting to mandate that flame retardants be added to materials for clothing and furniture and automobile seats, that kind of thing. So there is a tremendous demand. Also, every person driving around with an automobile has antimony in their car because it's used in the batteries to actually strengthen the lead. So it has a lot of industrial and military uses. We don't know the exact demand around the world, but we do know that in 2024, the United States imported 140,000 metric tons of antimony as antimony trioxide. So there is a huge demand. China is still taking in a lot of concentrate for their own processing. As we all know, they don't allow any to be exported, but they certainly import a lot of it. And that tells us, we think, that they may be worried about their own domestic supply of antimony to supply their own manufacturing and military needs. That would be something that would, we think, be important, as well as, of course, the geopolitical aspects of what they're doing. We also know that what used to be the largest antimony mine in the world, which is in China, is actually running out of ore. It's been in operation for 120 years, and we think they're running out of ore, and that of course their extraction costs are going up. So very high demand around the world. Every country in the world includes antimony in their critical minerals list. There's no production in North America, save for a little bit of production that comes from the smelter, which is in British Columbia. They produce about 150 tons a year of antimony, really as a byproduct from their smelting of lead ore. There is some talk now about another operation in the United States, which will be shipping copper concentrate. We don't know exactly where yet, and they will have a little bit of antimony produced from that. So the other thing that we've heard, kind of a rumor and people talking about, a consortium that's attempting to be formed to actually build a refinery smelter in the United States, which would take ore from several operations, potentially including ours. That's still a rumor. We haven't heard any more details on that. I would also mention that the United States Department of Defense is very anxious to secure antimony resources. They have invested very heavily in a project in Idaho, which is called the Stibnite mine, owned by a company called Perpetua. They've invested very heavily in that. And they've also invested somewhat in a small refinery in Montana that was an antimony refinery. They don't have any supply, but they're looking for something. So the United States government, through the Department of Defense and other areas, are actually very anxious to secure, let's call them domestic supplies of antimony. And being the United States, they consider Canada domestic. So I think there's a potential there. I would also mention that we're 75 kilometers from a deep sea port. So, and we're about 80 kilometers from the US border. So, as far as our potential into the United States would be pretty easy from a mine producing antimony at our site.
Well, obviously, the credibility of you as an experienced veteran in antimony is translating well to both share volume, interest, and capital, attracting capital. So what should shareholders be looking forward to, say, in the next quarter?
The next quarter will be really talking about our drilling. Because of how long it takes to get assays, we probably won't start putting out press releases with assays for well, let's say a month or a month and a half. I keep pushing on the lab to be faster, but it is what it is. So, we should start putting out, and there'll be a continuous stream of press releases with drill hole assays over the next probably 3 or 4 months, and even beyond that, because whatever we drill at the end will take another 3 or 4 weeks to get the results. So there'll be a good news flow over the next quarter and quarter and a half sort of thing. One of the things that we're looking at, and again, I can't promise either way, but one of the things we're looking at is to potentially produce a maiden resource for this project, potentially in the first quarter of 2026. We have a model already made of all the information that exists on the property. I would mention that there's a lot of past work has been done on this property. There were about 25 drill holes, about 5,400 meters of drilling when we took over. We've since added 16 drill holes and about 3,100 meters of drilling. So let's say 9,000 meters of drilling and about 40 drill holes. So we have a fairly large database, and we've constructed a model from that. And we will be using that model for two things. First of all, to show us where to point our drills, and secondly, to fill in gaps in the data. So as I mentioned, that was one of our goals for this program.
Well, Jim, thank you so much for your time today. And for those of you interested in finding out more about antimony resources, please go to the following website. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you very much.